The first sound is not squeaking, it's the iron key's sentence as it kisses the lock. Short, final, bored. You hold your lanthorn low so Horn turns cold air into something that won't lie, and the stare answers your boot with damp that has learned 100 names for darkness. Gale stink is not one smell. It is a choir. Old straw, wet stone, tallow that thinks it's polite, vinegar in a bucket that someone meant to use, piss that remembers its owner only by the time of day, rust that keeps its promises better than men keep theirs. A gaoler with a face like a griddle carries a ring on his belt and a ledger under his arm and tells you the same piety he tells everyone who can read. No one comes down this way unless they belong here. You look at the ledger and understand why dungeon rats are fat with education and prisoners go by rumor. The names are in the wrong column, and the key learned how to say no long before the scribe learned how to spell pity. Before we go further, do 2 quick things that keep this channel breathing like a bellows. Subscribe and tap the bell. We add a fresh corridor every day. And in the comments, tell me the 3 items you'd carry into this keep's underbelly if the door closed behind you. Horn lanthorn or candle cap, vinegar rag or posy, staff or hook, chalk or tally slate, bread crust or bone spoon. You follow the gaoler because curiosity prefers light and light prefers Horn. The corridor is built like a promise nobody intends to keep. Narrow enough to teach men about shoulders, low enough to make tall men bow, crooked enough to whisper. Cells sit like open mouths along the wall, iron teeth waiting for someone else's story. In one, a debtor's pit fitted with a grate. In another, an oubliette shaped like a wine bottle, wide enough to collect regrets and drains. Further along, a slab with rings where wrists learn to call time something other than hours. The gaoler's lamp, not horned, talks too loudly, teaching shadows how to become rats before your eyes can decide. You hold your own lanthorn so Horn throws a steady coin on straw and stone, and the coin shows you why rats don't need to be brave. Tallow drips into old reeds, crusts hide in blanket seams. A bit of marrow is stuck to a crack where the wall forgot its own appetite. The drain at the back, 3 fingers wide, 2 stones high, breathes better than half the men did on census day. Waste runs one way, grain dust falls another. The rats write their ledger with nose and paw and the confidence of creatures who know who keeps the keys. Dungeon rats are exactly who you'd be if you had whiskers and no charter. They love warm air and weak fences. They breed where straw and bread meet. They study the kitchen from the sewer. They trust tallow more than theology. They learn gaolers' roots as well as gaolers do, and take fewer bribes. Their world is a tailor's shop for opportunity. Holes sized to whiskers, cracks sized to ribs, rungs sized to courage. They come when someone drops a spoon, because spoons lick more than mouths do. They come when a candle stutters, because a hand tried to blow it out through a grate and taught air how to bring news. They come when you bring a man downstairs in irons and leave his shoes on because toes are easier than statutes and they prefer the slow meals most. Mid-scene, while Horn makes honesty unfashionable and your nose has decided to pull rank over your eyes, add 1 line to our common nailboard for later parts. Right, I'd harden a cell by and finish with the drill you'd teach any keep. Bar grates with tight mesh, cap lamps at mouth height, lime in drain channels, bread ration in troughs not cloth, chalk dots for cell checks, rat boards by straw. You ask the gaoler about rations and learn 2 truths. The Lord's allowance looks dignified in ink, and men with keys prefer coin to receipts. Bread half weight, watered ale, a bowl that smells like onions remember entitlement, and another bowl, smaller, that remembers nothing. In the cell where a debtor coughs into straw, rats wait under his blanket the way bad habits wait under sermons. He lifts his leg and they scatter. He sleeps and they vote. He breaks a crust to claim his share and 2 little bodies burst from the drain to take their tithe. He keeps a bone spoon because spoons make better weapons than prayers in a room like this. He wakes to the feeling that says a tale has decided to be bolder than mercy. The gaoler sells a candle stub down the corridor and pretends the light will keep teeth away. You notice the stub dripping into a trough where bread was meant to go. Tallow seasons fear. Rats understand that recipe better than your parish priest does. You ask about cats, and the gaoler laughs like a door. Cats cost, he says. Terriers are noisy. He has a terrier now, somewhere up the corridor, a dog that used to sing triumph at rats and now sings boredom because his owner learned to sell his small howls to visitors who want proof someone cares. The dog sleeps near the ledger. The rats sleep near the drain. You scratch the terrier behind the ear because he tells the truth with less interest than any man down here. He crunches something that used to have whiskers and looks offended at the flavor. You look at the ledger and feel the same way. Why did rats eat men? Begin with boredom. Prisoners who were never sentenced were never visited. Men kept for ransom were kept on starvation because rumor prefers skinny proof. A wife barred from seeing her husband took to leaving crusts where a gaoler would find them before eyes did. Forgotten is a schedule, not a feeling. Lice and hunger teach men to lie still. Rope burns teach them to keep their limbs useful by hoarding. Fevers teach them not to bother. A rat that has learned to ignore kicks learns to test fingers. A rat that has learned to ignore curses learns to taste. He begins at leather thong, salt from sweat, wool where damp kept flavor, places where the body has turned into something the body no longer salutes. You will not pretend poetry can make that less true. Because you walked kitchens before you walked cells, you can draw the map that explains which drains feed which rooms. The scullery sends broth to the keep's back wall. The bakery's breath goes to a channel that remembers flour. The tallowar's vat leaks like a greedy sermon into the channel where the outer ward floods. The night soil pit argues with the river in a grammar rats have a gift for reading. Food above, waste below, heat all winter, straw everywhere. The rat's world is a monastery for appetites with drains for cloisters. If a man loses his place in the gaoler's book, he does not so much starve as he goes from feast to being the food density convenience prefers. You crouch by an oubliette because someone said the word and thought they understood it. The shaft is not deep, enough to bruise the idea of sky, enough to give a body time to become memory. You drop a crust to see who answers. The crust makes a sound like a confession too small to be worth writing. 2 whiskers appear at the drain slot and dismiss you as a clumsy god. A third arrives and steals from the second. A fourth comes only when the flame of your horn moves away. This is the truth you will carve at mouth height later. Rats come last because men who loved rules last come last. The gaoler scratches the ledger where a name should go and draws a line instead. Lines do not talk back. There are keeps that fought this like they meant to live, and you collect their drills because you promised you would bring receipts, not fables. Drains limed fortnightly, straw shaken daily, horn mandatory, and cap drills imposed on friends and enemies. Troughs for bread so rats smell fewer hands in cloth. Chalk dots for checks made at dawn and dusk, so laziness must rub itself against record. Cat rations listed like men's. Dog lanes cut through straw like fire breaks. Snares in drains retrieved by boys who are paid in bread without being allowed to invent a ballad about it. There is a keep that paid a penny per tale because gaolers love numbers more than pity. There is a keep that made the beadle tap each door twice at curfew and twice at dawn, so the ledger could be counted in wrists, not ink. Rats learn to rehearse elsewhere. Midway down the second passage, you give the gaoler a job that will buy a day's silence. You hand him chalk and tell him to write cap, not breath at every cone, horn, not tallow at every bracket, bread in trough, not cloth by every hatch, lime drain by every slot. He grumbles until he hears whiskers scritch inside the wall and decides he wanted to write all along. You chalk searcher ledger checked above his desk and make him nod in public. He will cheat tomorrow. He will get caught tomorrow. He will improve next week because you will be rude enough to stand with horn at mouth height until he learns the performance is cheaper than his pride. You knot rope on a chest and yank while the gaoler watches. You tell him the same sentence you told an abbess last season. Loop to chest at dusk. Tug test. Window unbarred on Beadle's day. And he repeats it because he heard it at the rate board and hates that law is now furniture. You let him hate it. You require obedience. He shows you the bucket of lime he keeps for show, and you make him slake a fresh batch while you watch. You listen for the hiss that pays wages. It arrives like a small creature deciding to be honest. He looks down the corridor and pretends this is all someone else's idea. You let him argue with imaginary men. Rats do not argue. Rats test. Because no one is allowed to keep dignity without receipts, you walk the pit garden as you always do and make the steward read the week's line for straw and lime, as if it were a dock bill. Straw in 4 bales, shaken 4. Lime slaked, 2 barrels, used 1 1/4. Boards planed, 12. Ropes dried, 3 coils. Horn height posted, checked. Soup ledger read, yes. The steward signs because he has learned salt prefers dots to hymns. The bell captain hums the bucket cadence because snow pretends to be holy when it is merely troublesome. The cart's wheel finds the same stone, and you forgive it again because forgiveness is cheaper than pretending you will dig it out today. You end where any dungeon teller's worth your time should end. Under a plank you nail high enough that laziness must bruise itself to leave. It will not say rats ate men, because that is a poem that pays no bills. It will say bread in trough, not cloth, drains limed fortnightly, straw shaken daily, horn mandatory, cap drill with children, chalk dots at dusk and dawn, rope loop on chest, window unbarred on Beatles Day, soup ledger read, no sermons longer than soup. You will tap each line with your staff so tired hands can reach. You will march the gaoler along the row and make his mouth say what his ledger has learned to pretend. You will leave horn glowing like law and chalk thick enough to shame. You will walk back up the stair and ask your viewers 3 things in the comments. Would you cap at the cone or blow? Would you lime the drain today or tomorrow? Would you stand at mouth height with horn until someone paid soup in receipts? Then you will ask them to subscribe and tap the bell so the next corridor lands while their wrists still remember rope and their thumbs still smell of chalk. Say continue if you want to take down the second passage, into the dead book, the drain trough, the bread trough, the rat board, the cat ration, and nail the rules where the gaoler's hand and the searcher's rod will both brush them without asking permission. Bring the line you'd hang under your own lintel. I'll bring horn, chalk, rope, lime, straw, a ledger that finally refuses adjectives, and the habit that keeps whiskers and keys from writing the same stories. Turning dread into furniture you can touch. The key turns again and the stone throat clears itself. Second passage, same damp, older lies. You lift the horn so its warm coin climbs the wall to where the ledger nail has fretted mortar. The gaoler shuffles, proud of the wrong things. Your chalk presses against his dead book and leaves a white bruise where names should be. Blank means breath, you say. He bristles. You tap the page again. Blank means breath or neglect. You print dates where ink feared them, then write a strip for his eye level beside the peg where he hangs his ring. Chalk dots at dawn and dusk. Breath or blank, rod pays bread. No names vanish into stone. He nods because a plank has started to hold him up, and it's safer than guilt. The drain trough answers faster than men. It runs along the base of the second passage like a sentence that knows how to dodge, 3 fingers deep, 2 stones high, limed last month, shamed this morning by neglect. You listen with a ladle, dropping lime into the trickle where Greece tried to found a faith. Steam like honesty kicks your nose. Rats slam their whiskers against stone and wait for you to forget. You do not. You nail a small placard above the trough where laziness must scrape its sleeve. Lime fortnightly, vinegar nightly, straw changed daily, cats paid in bread, no cloth near grates. He balks at cats. Rats pay tails, you add. Numbers make heroes out of men who would never survive a song. Bread was a kindness until it became a trap. You move it from laps to troughs. Gaolers like tossing crusts through bars like absolutions. Cloth caught crumbs, straw remembered, drains carried news. You carry a rough board on 2 bricks and nail it knee-high where a hand you didn't order will have to rest. Bread in trough, not cloth. Your voice stays in the rule's rhythm until even a scribe will understand dawn by rehearsing. Bread in trough, not cloth. Horn at mouth height, not hope. Cap, not breath. Lime, not rumor. Rope loop, not regret. He repeats it, hating you and loving how the sentence steers his body without borrowing his pride. Rats don't fear light. They fear habit that learns speed. You set 2 rat boards on the second passage's straw, planks armed with nail teeth, disguised with garnish, dried peas to tickle whiskers, rancid suet to flirt. You pin them to the floor through straw, so boards can't travel the way shame does. The gaoler stares, impressed against his will, when the first whiskered nose pushes the board's edge, then the second, then a squeal that pays for 3 cap rings at the lamps. Tail to stew, you say. He blinks. You'll help read the soup column at market, you add, because stew wins where law likes to talk too much. You walk the cat ration like a bailiff. Most keeps imagine cats feed on gratitude. Gave them nothing, expected ballads. Here you barter. Fish spine on feast days, bowl of milk from the tallower's ledger when hornburns smell noble, a scrap of stew from the porch on Beatles Day. You chalk cat paid above the arch that leads to the mess, and terrier walked where the boy ties his rope. The terrier's owner confesses the dog sleeps near the ledger, and you look at the data differently. He is guarding the wrong throat. Tie him by the drain, you say. Make him bored where whiskers sing. He grins like a man whom mathematics finally included in its jokes. Mid-scene, while Horn writes coin-shaped truth and the drain admits to learning your name, add 1 small ordinance to our common nail board. Write, I'd block rats by, and finish with your cheap drill. Liming slots fortnightly, tying terriers near drains, not desks, paying cats in bread, setting boards with nail teeth pinned to stone, trough bread, not cloth, chalk dots at dawn and dusk. The gaoler performs decency around feed time. He slaps a crust into a straw corner. Rats roll their eyes and step forward after he passes. You stop the performance by moving dinner under the guard's face. Troughs get mounted flush to bars with slats that permit fingers and deny whiskers. Ladles pour in a rhythm that belongs to soup, not pity. The searcher's rod tastes the rim for tallow where his breath tried to unlearn its manners. You have the boy who sold tallow caps at the shrine teach the cap drill here. Cap, cap, cap over the lantern by the door until the gaoler's hand cedes its breath to a thing that doesn't lie. The oubliette asks for culture. You lower a bucket because nobody should find rats fascinating today, and the rope comes up with fewer arguments than it had last week. You hang bucket at winch where it will scar a forehead often enough to change a day, and lime sling at the peg below, so boredom owns hygiene. A whisper in the drain wishes to embarrass you. You pour vinegar without making the voice interesting. This is urban sanitation for people who prefer dead stories to living ones. You bring a priest because the rate board told you to, and you require his humility again. He performs the short psalm without teaching regret to become a chorus. He washes his hands after, under horn, where the alley can affirm him. He ties rope loop to chest and then unties it by himself to prove he believed his own sermon. He repeats your refrain, no sermons longer than soup, because he likes borrowing sentences that women will permit. He earns stew for reading a list of dots in the lane that turned into water at the quay. He smiles the right size. Good. Because charcoal peels lies away from food, you hold your horn close to the kitchen arch that feeds the second passage. The scullery boy wants to be liked by gaolers. He's been pushing crusts through a hatch after the Beatles' bell. You move him into arithmetic. Ladles into troughs, horn on bracket, cap ring at post, ash on splashes, vinegar jar near wrist, lid on pot, chalk dot on board, read at porch. He glowers until the stew mistress invites him to name the next soup from the column. He chooses onion and pride. He smiles without showing teeth. The street owns one more child properly. A nobleman's son arrives like an education you can spend. He believes cells are a play. He believes rats are a rumor. He believes your chalk is disrespectful ink. You introduce him to the drain and to limestone that hisses when it likes your math. You make him carry the rat board in both hands so he can inventory terror later without pretending to confess. You bring him to the plank and have him read every line out loud while he tries not to sound sorry. Bring by bell. Window unbarred, vinegar jar at door, rope loop on chest, horn at mouth height, chalk renewed, soup read, no sermons longer than soup. He stumbles on the last one. You make him practice. The dead book no longer gets to be poetic. You bring it into the lane under horn and force the gaoler to hold it where the stew mistress can see. Names stand up or lie down. Blanks become breaths until proven otherwise. Dots get added in front of neighbors, not inside stone. The clerk's board takes the sum with the calm that ships prefer. The alderman's nephew writes practice kept beside paid and does not look at his sleeve for admiration. Your plank of nouns becomes a guarantee of visiting masters. The alley stops trusting men and starts trusting rules. The rats are annoyed. Good. You audit straw the way you audit men. Straw changed daily, not when a man has time. Shaken at dawn, not nostalgia's bedtime. Stored up off the flag, not in nests. Fetched by boys who must then spend an hour at the drain scratching lime into mortar until they understand what food does to sewers. The gaoler complains straw costs. The rate board replies lime parish. The steward ties 2 pennies to a string in his ledger and pulls them under soup, so pride learns where money goes. The terrier's owner reports fewer whiskers near the trough. The cat clergyman, offended by the language of dogs, leaves a gift that pays for a horn pane in the corridor. Everyone claps once, exactly once. The cart doesn't clap. The cart waits. Because you promised to teach someone else's keep without indulging voice, you carry the plank into a second gale whose greats know poetry too well. You don't argue. You nail nouns at mouth height where laziness must bruise itself. Bread in trough, drains limed, straw shaken, horn mandatory, cap drill, chalk dots at dawn and dusk, rope loop, window unbarred, soup red, no sermons longer than soup. You drill the cap with children. You prove horn height with a clerk's forehead. You pull a rat board with a beggar's grin. You retie rope around a chest until a nobleman's apprentice nails his own rule to his master's door. You leave before gratitude can practice. Because the channel survives on your small additions, do the 2 things that pay for horn and chalk and rope. Subscribe and tap the bell. We publish a new room daily. And in the comments write, I'd harden a cell by with your drill carved to a verb list. Bread in trough, drains limed, straw shaken, horn capped, cap drill children, chalk dots posted, rope loop on chest, window unbarred, soup ledger read. I will pin the ones that will still be true when your lamplight belongs to someone else. The rats aren't the villains, neglect is, and you nail its tricks until it forgets. Oubliette buckets at winches, troughs for bread, horn at mouth height, cap rings, lime slings, rat boards, tail tariffs, cats paid, terriers tied, searchers' rods dipping vinegar instead of superstition. Beetles chalk dots that know the difference between what is dead and what has been forgotten by men with keys. You inventory one last time before you climb the stair. Horn cool, chalk thick, rope dry, lime hiss quiet, straw fluffed, soup red, dots posted, beetle sober, searcher paid, terrier bored, cat smug. The gaoler watches you go with a face that believes rules might be furniture. You let your breath leave the dungeon as if horn were carrying it. Continue if you want to follow the drain under the silk hall to the river and pin cross marks where powder sleeps and star marks where horn proves it. Read the soup column at the porch until it sounds like law. Make a noble sign his name under a plank he thought was for other families. And leave a charter under the arch for keeps that haven't learned to be boring yet. Bring your rule. I'll bring horn, chalk, rope, lime, straw, the dead book facing outward, and the habit that keeps rats from writing the moral, turning dread into chores your hands can finish. The drain under the silk hall does not admit visitors. It permits apprentices, rats, and patients. You lift the horn so its warm coin sticks to slime-slick stone and shows you the width of the artery that feeds the alley's lower appetite. 2 stones high, 3 fingers deep in summer, a hand deep this season because kitchens believe in comfort. The flow carries flour ghost, tallow tears, vinegar's old confessions, a saffron brag from last market, and the river's slow reply. You chalk a cross where powder sleeps and a star where horn proved itself 3 Saints' Eves in a row, then mark the stone with the word drains. Understand, lime. The gaoler's terrier trotting at your heel acts offended, the way dogs do when a mission smells like numbers. You rub his ears and he forgives you. Above, the silk hall's children cap, cap, cap in a rhythm. Even rats hate. Before we crawl farther, do 2 cheap things that keep these corridors funded and loud. Subscribe and tap the bell. We publish a new room daily. And in the comments, tell me 1 drain rule you'd nail by any kitchen hatch. Lime fortnightly, vinegar nightly, cloth banned, rat boards pinned, cat fed, terrier tied by slot, the tunnel fork. The tunnel forks under the cord the Tallowers sluice, right to the quay where the river practices forgetting. Left first. You find a pan someone swore they emptied. Tallow clings in a sulk-like doctrine, the smell that teaches whiskers and men to hope for theft. You cap your cone. Lay sand and scrape the lye into a bucket, then order a board hung at the hatch at mouth height, tallow out before dusk, vinegar after, cloth nowhere near. The Tallower's boy, red-eared, eager, and in love with efficiency, mutters he had a system. I will like your system next week, you answer, and make him walk the vinegar jar under Horn so the alley can disagree if he forgets. He hates you in the useful way, right to the quay. The river's breath meets sewer breath where stone learns the difference between gossip and current. You chalk crosses where powder once flirted with a hatch. You chalk stars where Horn lit the right side of greed 3 nights running. You chalk fish at a scullion's door you trust because she drills cap drill with children for a ladle. The night watch boat bumps the arch twice, hooks like grammar resting under its oars. The cox, who has learned to like being bored, nods when he sees your marks and calls to a boy to copy them on their board with a knife point. That is what culture sounds like. Rats do not like the river when it's being honest, so you make it honest more often. Lime sling over drains, vinegar jar by hatch, cap rings at posts, Horn above every troublesome corner, sand kept where boots remember it, troughs set flush to bars where gnawing can't reach. You draft a chardelette, the little charter that rides under big ones, so stewards can't pretend to mishear. Bread in trough, not cloth, lime drain fortnightly, vinegar nightly, Horn mandatory, cap at mouth height, chalk dots at dawn and dusk. The alderman signs because the stew mistress reads the soup ledger at court, and some shame is cheaper than litigation. Rats adjust. That is all you require of them. The soup column changes voices when it gets read under stone. The mistress gives the ladle to a boy who smelled like drains last week and made him read brush to bowls with a pronunciation that sounded like relief. He counts. Powder bowl paid cap drills, bowl inverted bought horn pains, tail tariff filled cat rations. Vinegar once more was the only faith the alley needed. When he finishes, the beadle adds dots out loud, and the clerk turns those dots into a letter that lets ships birth by Michaelmas. The boy does not care about ports. He cares that the stew mistress winked at him as if arithmetic were bravery. You tell him it is. You climb from the underworld with Horn still warm, chalk still blunt, rope still tame, and a letter in your pocket the beadle asked you to make a noble read. He arrives hot with inconvenience and tells you law belongs in halls, not alleys. You point him to the plank and move your cone so Horn writes the nouns on his eyes. Bring by bell, window unbarred on Beadle's day, vinegar jar at door, rope loop on chest, tug tested at dusk, Horn at mouth height, chalk renewed on Saints this eaves, soup for fines read weekly at porch, sweeps quarter rounds nailed to doors, tile crowns on street ovens, no sermons longer than soup. You hand him the beadle's letter that turns dots into ships, then you hand him the stew ledger where fines feed bread. Sign, you say. He does, and the rat above his signature looks for a mischief to inherit and finds none. Culture is a rate board under an arch. You nail a second plank where laziness must bruise itself to leave. Drains limed, troughs mounted, cap rings pinned, Horn mandatory, rat boards pinned, cats paid, terriers tied, chalk dots at dawn and dusk, soup red. The alderman's nephew hammers well and doesn't look up. He will be unbearable at supper. You will forgive him because Horn did not wobble when he stood beneath it. An alchemist who loves emperors more than alleys wants you to forgive sulfur when it forgets. You chalk a cross big enough to shame and make him spell the charter about powder out, Horn in, heat away. He recites with the fervor of a penitent who has learned that Horn saves ceilings and rope saves wrists. He hands you a jar that would cure hope faster than a psalm. You buy it for the vinegar line that keeps searchers from repeating old mistakes. His wife nods once over his shoulder, as if the alley just learned to say the word household without drama. Because your viewers ask to see the ledger of forgetting, you make the Gaoler stand with his dead book facing outward and your chalk facing his mouth. He reads blanks and decides breath. He reads names and decides dot. He reads dates and decides the cart. He learns to prefer boredom to litigation. The searcher taps the lintel with her rod, and the Gaoler's hand moves before his mouth finds an adjective. That is what victory looks like. The rats learn a new treaty. Drain time at dawn, not dusk. Trough times fixed by horn, not pity. Floorboards that yield to pinned teeth more often than bundled pride. You know you're winning when terriers nap from famine, not boredom. The Beggar King shows you a bored nod at the edge. You drive 2 nails into the stone through the plank, and he laughs, because you are rude, and because rudeness keeps cities. The alley writes a small gospel for winter now that understreets are tamed, sand under axle and heel, rope through cart bed, boards roughened with ash, straw shaken, lime slaked slow, cap and lid at bell, boat under arch. You put it under the plank beside the soup column because practice unifies things the river tried to separate. The bell captain keeps time. The dog lays his head on the stone exactly where the cart pauses. Men with grudge for poetry go somewhere else to scratch. Mid-arc, while vinegar still holds its committee and horn still throws faithful coins, give me 1 line you would paint under any arch where sewers teach kitchens their manners. Right, I'd keep drains honest by. And finish with the act you will enforce. Lime fortnightly, vinegar nightly, bread in trough, cloth away, chalk dots on lids, cap drill and scullery. I'll pin the lines that can be taught to boys between spoons and carve them into Part 4's plank. You walk a noble to a drain because memory is political. He bends without drama and sniffs lime like a convert. You make him toss vinegar for a rod tap. You make him cap a cone at the scullery. You make him bang the rate board once with his palm so his chest learns where law lives now. No sermon, just a tour. When he leaves, he nods to the stew mistress like a man who would like to be fed after he signs. She will feed him because she is better at government than a bench. You post your little charter for keeps that want to inherit without sinning. Bread in trough, drains limed, straw shaken, horn at mouth height, cap rings, rat boards, cats paid, terriers tied, chalk dots, soup red. No sermons longer than soup. You tack it to the plank under the arch with 2 mint tacks and a ferrule tap so wood and memory are on the same page. The plank hums. The cart waits. And because this is the channel where you turn dread into touching, I ask you to do the boring thing that keeps cities. Subscribe and tap the bell while your chalk is still thick. In the comments, nail 1 lintel law you'd actually hang where tired hands will have to touch it. Bread in trough, lime fortnightly, cap not breath, rope to chest, soup read. Then say continue so we can take the rule board into the Gaoler's office. Post the star and cross at the quay where rumor loves to reverse maps, read the soup ledger in a storm, and plant a charter under the next arch for a ward that hasn't yet learned to be boring. I'll bring horn, chalk, rope, lime, straw, the dead book facing outward, and the habit that keeps drains and doors from telling the same story. Turning fear into chores you can finish. The Gaoler's office is a short corridor with a desk pretending to be a rampart. You set your horn on the board so light sits where excuses like to breed, then lift your plank until the nouns are exactly at mouth height, where laziness has to bruise itself to leave. Bread in trough, not cloth. Drains limed fortnightly. Vinegar nightly. Straw shaken daily. Horn mandatory. Cap, not breath. Chalk dots at dawn and dusk. Rope loop on chest, tug tested at dusk. Window unbarred on Beatles Day. Soup ledger read at porch. No sermons longer than soup. You tap each line with the ferrule like a metronome for conscience. The Gaoler, whose face keeps failing to decide between sulk and relief, copies the lines onto his dead book's flyleaf because now the dead book answers to the living plank. He ties the terrier by the drain, not the ledger, and you forgive him 2 old jokes. Because drains teach sewers what cities forget, You carry the star and the cross to the quay, where maps come to change their minds. The quay master's office smells like rope and exoneration. You chalk stars on lintels that kept Horn high when gusts behaved badly during yesterday's squall. You chalk crosses on doors that store saltpeter, because powder is culture's child only when Horn and common sense chaperone. A river factor steps from a counting room with a ship letter in his fist and the look of a man whose dots just became salt. You make him read the bill aloud to the stew mistress at the porch, because soup and ships have always shared ledgers, even when poets pretended not to notice. She nods, ticks her column, and tells him to eat. He does, because weather is easier to face with onions and law in your stomach. Storm turns soup into law without asking permission. The sky crouches, Horn trembles, chalk thickens in your belt from damp. The bucket cadence under the arch hits your ribs before it hits your ear. You bring the stew board into the open because receipts are braver under weather. The mistress plants her ladle like a flagstaff and reads shouting distance loud. Brush to bowls, 7 ladles, bowls to horn panes, 4 delivered, 2 shrine, 2 cloth hall, tail tariff, cats paid, terrier tied by slot, drains limed, 2, vinegar nightly, 8, bearer's bread and onions, kept. Widow stipends, extra 2 ladles at the cell marked late. Dice house horn tax received, powder doors crossed. She does not raise her voice on no sermons longer than soup. The rain learns to listen. The alderman signs the week's coin in a corner of the plank and then holds the edge while a gust tries to make philosophy of it. He is improving. The rate board becomes a harbor where words dock and unload instead of posing for portraits. You add drains, lime tally posted, and troughs inspected, and cat ration, public and terrier tether recorded. The clerk, who has spent this season learning to love boredom, writes practice kept across the soup line and adds storm read as if the ledger were a navigation table. He looks older in a way you trust. A lantern boy, bare shins, chalked thumb, draws a fish under the plank's nail and then 2 more on the doors that fed 2 strangers while you watched Horn keep faith in rain. You pretend you didn't see him do it. The alley claps once in the rhythm of lids. A drain coughs behind the silk hall because powder never likes to watch you fix it. You squat with Horn close and find the smug crescent of tallow clinging to a joint where cloth met impatience. Vinegar tells truth louder than rain. Lime promises to repeat it tomorrow. Chalk says lime where the joint thought it could forget. The hall mistress who learned Horn height before she learned to forgive you brings a boy with a bucket and a face too proud to be lazy. You make him slake under Horn, not under hope, and count aloud so drain and boy memorize each other. He will teach another boy tomorrow. That is what you came here to purchase. The gaoler tries half a miracle. He brings his dead book into the office and turns it outward without your hand on his shoulder. Names with dates under chalk dots that match soup tokens that match drain lime tallies. The searcher taps the page with her rod. Her vinegar jar sits on the desk like an adjunct clerk. The beetle deletes a blank that tried to pretend forgetfulness can be a policy. You force the gaoler to read the short psalm for dots, not for ears, and then to wash his hands where lantern boys can see him. Somewhere a poet is irritated by the smell of clean. Your work is safe. Because culture travels by plank and embarrassment, you carry the charter under the next arch into a ward that still sings elegies louder than ledgers. You nail nouns at mouth height where tired men will have to touch them. Bread in trough, drains limed, vinegar nightly, horn mandatory, cap drill, chalk dots, rope loop, window unbarred, soup red, no sermons longer than soup. You drill cap with children until their wrists bully their mothers lovingly. You make the priest tie rope loop to chest and untie it by himself so he can evangelize competence honestly. You force the alderman to hold the board while the stew mistress reads the column. You assign the beggar king to point at symbols for a coin to soup. The first rat, insulted, moves elsewhere. That is the only lyric you will permit. Storm breaks harder. The quay becomes a mirror no actor deserves. The arch becomes a shoulder. The cart becomes a pronoun. You walk the rope loop through the bed, throw sand under wheel, Rough the boards with ash, shake straw, slake lime in ladles, and make winter envy routine. The priest's psalm runs short and sweet across water. The beetle's dots land without drama. The boat rows hooks as if rowing had always been an argument worth winning quietly. You inventory wet with the calm of a keeper. Horn cool, chalk thick, rope dry when it matters, lime hiss honest, straw obedient, soup column red, cross chalked where powder sleeps, star chalked where horn proved itself in rain, fish chalked where stew outlived rumor. You are dirty, and you have not needed a single adjective. The gaoler fetches a rat-board slab you did not order and asks where to nail it. This is mercy, a man asking how to become bored in the right direction. You pin the board through straw into stone so teeth meet iron sooner than grain. You sprinkle peas that will tickle whiskers. You paste suet under horn so shame can see itself arrive. He grins when the first tale pays for a pain and then goes to the porch with it, like a boy who has decided not to bother the dead book today. You allow yourself to like him with an economy you never grant quickly. Because the channel lives on your small additions, pause and do the two things that carry planks under new arches. Subscribe and tap the bell. We publish a new room daily, and in the comments write I'd keep drains honest by, followed by the act you'd nail above any hatch. Lime fortnightly, vinegar nightly, bread in trough, cloth away, rat boards pinned, cat paid, terrier tied, chalk dots on lids. I'll pin the durable ones and scratch them onto the next plank we plant, where laziness must bruise itself to leave. The moneylender's hinge, re-oiled a week ago, remains chalked with a second circle bigger than the first. He tries to pretend the mark is fashion. You make him read the soup ledger aloud while the chalk watches. He pays horn at the shrine because you made horn part of his confidence. He makes a small speech about the dignity of capital and you say, "No sermon's longer than soup," and the ladle knocks the rail in applause. He smiles like a man who prefers eating to winning. The alley approves. The alchemist brings you a jar of vinegar he swears he improved. He is not wrong. It stings your conscience in the right places. You trade him 3 cap rings and make him chalk crosses on 2 doors where sulfur sleeps behind conversation. His wife marks them darker. Powder pretends to be annoyed and becomes useful. You hang a tiny plank in his yard that says heat away and forgive his latest Latin. Because keeps teach streets when they are humble, you march the gaoler to the rate board and make him stand while the stew mistress reads, the clerk posts, the beetle dot hums, the lantern boys chalk, and the beggar king points neat fingers at fish. He discovers that governance is a parade of nouns. He also discovers he likes being seen following them. The final storm carries a rumor of cargo and a rumor of fever in the same gust. You do the only thing that works across both. You nail nouns where tired people will touch them without thinking, and you drill beats until muscle can sing without mouths. Bread in trough, drains limed, vinegar nightly, horn mandatory, cap drill, chalk dots, rope loop, window unbarred, soup red, no sermons longer than soup. You tap the plank once for each line. The alley hums the bucket cadence. The cart's wheel finds the same stone you always promise to dig up tomorrow. You forgive it again and put your chalk into your belt for the next street. Endings in this work are only doors for the next corridor, so make yours useful. Subscribe and tap the bell while your lanthorn still remembers your hand. In the comments, nail the one lintel law you would actually hang at mouth height in your block, short enough to be obeyed by wrists, not debated by tongues. Bread in trough, lime fortnightly, cap, not breath, rope to chest, no sermons longer than soup. Then say continue so we carry the plank into the keep's gatehouse. Post stars and crosses where ships and sewers shake hands. Read the soup ledger in the square while rain forgets to scare people. And plant the charter under the next arch for the ward that hasn't yet learned to be boring enough to live. I'll bring horn, chalk, rope, lime, straw, the dead book facing outward, and the habit that keeps rats clever but hungry, turning fear into chores your hands can finish. The gatehouse pretends to be a conscience with teeth. You make it a desk with nouns. Horn on the shelf throws a steady coin across mortar wounds. Your plank goes up at mouth height where laziness has to bruise itself to leave. Bread in trough, not cloth. Drains limed fortnightly. Vinegar, nightly. Straw shaken daily. Horn mandatory. Cap, not breath. Chalk dots at dawn and dusk. Rope loop on chest, tug tested at dusk. Window unbarred on Beatles Day. Soup ledger read at porch. No sermons longer than soup. The sergeant, boots that once liked the sound of their own heel, copies the lines onto a slate nailed to the wicket so that any man who passes must mouth them like numbers. The porter ties the terrier by the slot instead of the ledger. The gaoler, catching you watching him, ties a second knot without being told. That is culture. Before we follow the drain past the old armory and take the kitchen's measure by light instead of stories, do the two cheap things that keep these corridors lit. Subscribe and tap the bell. We publish a new room daily. And in the comments tell me one gatehouse rule you'd hang where wrists cannot avoid it. Chalk dots at dawn and dusk. Rope loop tug tested. Cap drill by children each market. Bread weighed at trough. No candles past cone. Kitchen first, because rats read menus before they read charters. The scullery steams. Horn warms the piles where tallow would otherwise practice treason. The hatch that opens to the corridor now wears a trough bolted flush to stone, not a cloth where crumbs could learn to plan. You write bread weighed over the trough and hang a balance and a bag of weights at mouth height, not in a chest, so the boy who ladles stew must confess to iron before he can plead to appetite. He tries a joke about light loaves, your ladle knocks the rail twice and he swallows it. Name your loaf, you say. One to the west cells, one to the debtors. He calls them aloud as he drops them into the trough, and the debtors in the second passage hear their dinner spoken before they see it. Names turn into bread before they turn into dots. Rats hate this more than lime. The bakehouse is honest in flour and crooked in practice. The crown glows without sulk, the flue draws like a sober man, the baker's fingers account for weight before confession. But his boy, sharp, sweet, proud, likes to pass crusts to the gaoler because sleep comes easier when you pretend to have a friend in iron. You move kindness into public so it stops hiring rats. Bread stacked on slats, not in laps, slice told in the lane with horn and chalk. Loaves baked, 12. Cells called 10. Extra, and 2 fish chalked under the numbers if 2 were fed. The boy resists until a lantern-bearer his age reads the soup column beside it and nods. Peer review of decency is cheaper than ballads. Rat paths advertise themselves when you know how to read vanity. Grease in a seam that isn't yours. Saffron dust where saffron shouldn't dream. 2 colonels pretending to be accident on a sill where no man opens a hand after curfew. You scatter dried peas and lay 2 rat boards pinned through straw into stone, nail teeth hidden by suet that smells like pride. The gaoler proposes a bounty for tails, and you agree before he has time to romanticize hunting. Tail tariff. 1 ladle goes on the soup board. Cats paid gains a dot. Terrier tied gains a check. The first squeal buys 3 caps for cones. The second buys horn for a porch you like. The terrier's owner laughs until he remembers to be bored. Down the stair past the armory, a corridor that used to believe in armor and now believes in drains. You chalk a cross on the powder room's lintel, horn and humility, or the room stays shut. You chalk a star on the shop, where horn proved itself when a sleeve flirted with flame and lost interest. You chalk fish on the door that never forgot the trough rule. Rats watch from a crack and decide to relocate after you pour vinegar onto gossip until it smells like work. You saddle a bucket at a winch over an oubliette. You hang bucket at winch where foreheads must learn. Lime sling below it where shoulders cannot pretend not to see. Lime hisses. Your conscience appreciates arithmetic again. The ledger outside the gaoler's door facing the lane becomes literature with fewer adjectives. The searcher taps names with her rod. The beadle reads dots aloud. The clerk posts the week's line at the hall and in the square. The stew mistress reads soup beside it so both columns sing one song. Dots, 9. Bread, 12 loaves. Lime, 2 barrels slaked. Cats, 3 tails paid. Terrier, bored. Drains, limed. Windows, unbarred on Beatles Day. Rope loops, tug tested. Psalms, short. No sermons longer than soup. The alderman signs coin at the bottom, because coin is the only applause habit accepts safely. Because you promised an audit that counts more than breath, you walk a noble through spaces where he cannot buy metaphor. He takes the horn so his hand learns weight. He caps a cone so his mouth learns to shut up. He tosses lime into a slot and discovers that mercy can hiss. He bangs the plank with his palm until the nouns feel less like insults and more like furniture. He reads the soup column at the porch while the stew mistress nods. He learns to prefer bowls that equal numbers. He eats onion and bread and stops composing moral sentences out of other people's exhaust. You bring him into the second passage and make him stand still while bread hits trough and names get called. He needs to see which whiskers hate public dinner. Mid-scene, while Horn refuses to be heroic and Chalk turns storm into receipts, write one line you would staple to any kitchen door inside a keep. Begin, I'd require, and keep it short enough to be obeyed by wrists. Bread weighed at trough, horn mandatory, cap drill nightly, lime sling by hatch, cloth band, rat boards pinned, cats paid, terriers tied. I'll pin the ones that can outlive anyone's eloquence. The river swells again and forces you to compare drains and ships aloud. You stand in the square where Horn makes storm look like arithmetic and read the soup column with the mistress, while the clerk reads dots with the beadle. The boat bumps the arch and rows hooks like prayer. The bell captain keeps time with her lids, and ordinary men become a bucket line that looks like a psalm without nouns. A factor from the quay writes permission slips, while his lips learn to shape the stew list as if it were tied. You enjoy being boring where yesterday would have tried to become memory. The gaoler, to his credit, starts lying less often. He hands you 2 tales with a grin he doesn't recite. He shows you chalk dots on his own doorpost because he finally tied rope loop on a chest before you told him. He reveals, awkwardly, the name column he tore from his ledger so blanks would stop pretending to be policy. You make him nail the torn strip under the plank as a tiny convert's vow. He grimaces at himself and survives. You put paid next to his soup token because redemption is easier to track than admiration. Rats do not take defeats personally. They test other arenas. One finds a curtain held back with ribbon cut too short. You cut a new ribbon to 2 handbreadths and nail a rule above the cone. The gaoler laughs once and then obeys. One finds straw under a couch instead of in a hail. You shake it in the lane so shame must tidy with witnesses. One finds bread wrapped by a novice who forgot the trough. You make her feed the trough with a song and pay her in cap drill until she smiles for the right reason. None of this is romantic. All of this keeps cats bored. Because you promised the viewers plague carts and dungeons in the same season, you leave the keep for 1 hour to note that dots posted on the board synchronize the cart to drains. Lime in trench and lime in slot belong to the same arithmetic. The stew mistress reads extra ladles for the cells marked late and the houses chalked new. The cart bows to rope, the boat rows hooks, the alley hums, the gaoler's terrier naps at the drain and occasionally looks disappointed. Good dog. In a back cell, you find the sentence you came to nail to the door of this series. A man forgotten by ledger, not by sin or by sentence. Rats have learned his cousin's name because the cousin slid crusts through cloth after bell. The crusts taught whiskers to wait under blanket seams. The man taught despair to lie still. You move bread to the trough. You cap the cone. You lime the slot. You fetch a rope loop and put it on his chest and tug until your hand remembers the right magic. You call his name in the lane before you count him in dots. You mark a fish under his door so stew outruns pity. The rat boards hum. The terrier yawns. The gaoler stands and does not ask for applause. This is the miracle. You leave the keep by the gatehouse you made into a desk with nouns. Horn cools its pain. Chalk sleeps blunt. Rope climbs its nail. Lime sulks behind a lid you learn to love. Straw behaves across a threshold where it used to conspire. Soup tastes like law read aloud. The bell captain hums the clean rhythm that keeps drains and carts from writing poems about each other. You look once at your plank because wood that forgets needs a new nail, not a new philosophy. It reads like a good street, not a grisly story. Now do the boring holy thing we've practiced every day of this series. Subscribe and tap the bell while your chalk still tastes like vinegar. Then, in the comments, nail your lintel law. The single rule you'd actually hang where tired hands must touch it. Bread and trough, lime fortnightly. Cap, not breath. Rope loop on chest, no sermons longer than soup. Say continue so we carry this plank into the keep's chapel and the Lord's hall. Price drains like grain, drill rope until it becomes lullaby, and leave a charter under the next arch for a ward that hasn't yet learned to be uninteresting enough to live. I'll bring horn, chalk, rope, lime, straw, the dead book facing outward, and the habit that keeps Whiskers clever but hungry, turning fear into chores you can finish. The chapel downstairs smells like beeswax pretending to be penance, so you set your horn on the lectern and let warm light turn religion into furniture. The sacristan, sleeves rolled the way a man admits he lives here, stands by the cap ring you nailed last week and drills his wrists until cap, cap, cap becomes parish grammar. You hang a small plank at mouth height where laziness must bruise itself to leave. Cap, not breath. Horn mandatory. Candles, 2 hands from cloth. No vigils after bell. Psalm short. No sermons longer than soup. The Lord's chaplain arrives with the tone that makes stew curdle. You hand him the cap and ask him to cover a flame while he says his shortest prayer. He obeys with the surprise of a man who discovers sanctity, prefers technique. The novices watch and begin to love rules without asking for a hymn about it. The Lord's Hall pretends to be the country's brain. You make it the keep sink. You bring the plank under its beam and nail nouns where satin can't swerve. Bread in trough, drains limed fortnightly, vinegar nightly, straw shaken daily, horn mandatory, cap drill, chalk dots at dawn and dusk, rope loop on chest, window unbarred on Beatles' day, soup ledger read at porch. The Lord raises one eyebrow the way men raised on hawks do when furniture interrupts a boast. You put the Beatles' dotboard in his hand and the stew mistress's column in his other and stand there with horn until his mouth recites what he's holding. Dots become ships, ships become salt, salt becomes dinners, dinners become habits, habits become mercies that do not require coins with his face on them. He signs because horn makes people better at arithmetic than flattery ever did. You walk the drain that runs beneath the hall dais, the one that thinks it is an artery because it heard poems at feast. Tallow tears glisten where boys leaned plates to wait for seconds and forgot soap. Flower ghost whirls where kitchen maidens plotted. A slick ribbon of something unkind whispers the way sulfur does when grown men play empires by candlelight. You chalk a cross where heat must not be. You chalk stars where horn saved sleeves twice in last week's storm. You chalk lime on the stone where the slot forgets its job. The Lord watches from the dice as you sling gray into black and makes a face that tells the chamberlain to bring you bread later without letting you see him decide. That is a better poem than any fool ever earned in this room. Boredom teaches ropes how to become lullabies. You gather the bearers' guild in the hall's side passage where children like to practice running and adults like to forget to practice anything. Rope loops to chests, tug test at dusk, knot untied blindfolded, then tied again under horn, while a boy reads names from the soup column so hands have to behave and mouths have to listen. The gaoler's terrier watches with the dignity of a foreman. A noble page rolls his eyes once until the beggar king, drafted as metronome, taps the rhythm against the post with 2 knuckles and refuses to look up. At the end, you make every man tie a loop on someone else's chest and undo it again with permission. This is how wards learn to be families without turning into stories. Mid-circuit, while horn coins, honesty on stone and rope sleeps warm against wrists, do 2 cheap things that keep this series stocked like a bucket line. Subscribe and tap the bell. We publish a new corridor daily. And in the comments, write, "I'd hang under the chapel," with one rule, short enough that wrists can obey it faster than tongues can explain it. Cap, not breath. Horn mandatory. Psalm short. No vigils after bell. Candles 2 hands from cloth. The dead book faces outward in the gatehouse, now as a habit, not an apology. The gaoler reads names under horn each market eve when the stew ledger is read. Blanks are breath or negligence and get corrected before the cart becomes necessary. Dots land where they must in front of the men who lifted. Soup vouchers for late chalk get issued without sermon. You make him wash his hands in the lane where lantern boys can point and tell the next gaoler how it is done. He glowers, then grins, then pretends he meant to like being supervised by children. You take the plank to the armory because iron always believes it's exempt. Under the racks, where rat hearts like to keep their citizenship, you nail what rats and men both understand: bread in trough, rat boards pinned, cats paid, terriers tied, lime sling at slot. A veteran scoffs, then sets a board with nail teeth, then feigns he was bored before you arrived. That, too, is culture. You pay his grandson in cap rings and make him drill the sleeve distance from horn until his mother's mouth loosens. She has been angry for a long time. Lids are sometimes the only kindness that is affordable and true. Storm returns with enough vanity to recruit a choir. The square fills with damp argument. Horn panes blink. The boat under the arch hums the bucket beat until it becomes weather. You and the stew mistress stand opposite one another like two halves of the same oath, she with ladle and ledger, you with horn and plank, and read receipts into the rain. Brush to bowls, 8 ladles. Bowls to horn panes, 5 delivered. Tail tariff, 3 cats paid. Terriers tied, 6. Drains limed, 2. Vinegar nightly, all kitchens reported. Bearer's bread, 8 loaves. Widow stipends, kept. Extra at cells with fresh chalk. Dice horn tax received, powder doors crossed, no sermons longer than soup, the wind edits nothing. The alderman holds the edge of the board again so law doesn't learn to fly. Because prisoners bleach into statistics without chores, you invent jobs for cells that still have wrists. Straw shaken by men who remember their names. Troughs scrubbed by debtors after dinner. Lime slings managed by a lad who can count to 20 and not pretend numbers are insult. Cap rings polished by anyone convinced caps are an insult. Ropes coiled by men who failed to be noble on the surface and can be useful down here. Rats lose 3 hallways in a week because dignity and boredom have started to live in the same sentence. You chalk 2 fish under a door because the man inside taught another to cap and deserved stew more than spectacle. The Lord invites you to bless your own plank at supper because victory loves feasts. You arrive with horn and rope and an unwillingness to turn nouns into epigrams. You cap the dice candles with rings and rest the cap against the Lord's signet until his nose admits the value of beeswax that stops being a gossip. You make him call 2 cells by name before he picks the first course. He does, and a man below hears his name said in a room that used to pretend sunsets. You place the stew ledger on the salt trench so coin eats with humility. You slide the beetles board beside the trench so dots sit next to sauces. You leave before anyone can raise a cup to you because attention makes rats brave. Midway through winter, you take your plank to the keep's outer arch and plant the charter where wind has to learn it. Bread in trough, drains limed fortnightly, vinegar nightly, straw shaken daily, horn mandatory, cap, not breath, chalk dots at dawn and dusk, rope loop on chest, tug tested at dusk. Window unbarred on Beetle's Day. Soup ledger read at porch. No sermons longer than soup. 2 mint tacks, 2 blows from the farewell. The arch hums like wood that understood something and intends to outlive every clerk who misreads it. Because viewers asked about forgotten prisoners, you spend a morning in the second passage proving the opposite of poetry. You read names and call loaves. You cap cones and lime slots. You pull a board from straw and find suet where a rat tried to reorganize government. You make a boy carry the board to the armory and pin it through straw into stone so teeth meet iron sooner than flour. You chalk paid next to a spoon token because spoons write fewer lies than adjectives. Then you stand in the corridor and listen to men eat in public. Rats hate that sound. A merchant with a pen tries to buy exemption from your nouns by donating candles to the shrine. You swap them for horn panes before he finishes his sentence and nail no candles past cone under his warehouse bracket. He laughs the way clever men do when culture arrives in a single impolite stroke. Then he pays the horn tax at the dice house because the stew mistress reads the soup column where he sells spices, and he likes his reputation slightly less than he likes onions. The river thaws just enough to remind you that plague carts and drains belong to the same arithmetic. You carry sand to the lip, rope to the bed, boards to the slippery place, straw to the courage point, lime to the truth, horn to the reading of soup, chalk to tick the doors with fish where two were fed, crosses where powder sleeps, stars where horn did not lie in wind. You walk back to the gatehouse and write practice kept on your own board, like any other clerk, because clerks learned to love the phrase from you, and you want to keep it. Because this channel survives on your small follow-through, do the dull, heroic thing that keeps. Subscribe and tap the bell while your wrists remember rope. Then in the comments, nail your one lintel law, the rule you'll actually hang where tired hands must touch it. Bread in trough, lime fortnightly, cap not breath, rope loop tug tested, soup read, no sermons longer than soup. After that, say continue if you want to walk the last stretch, into the Lord's debt room where numbers learn to be humane, across the quay where storm tries to make drains into songs, back through the dungeon to post the final charter under the next arch, and leave this, keep bored enough to survive without your horn. I'll bring rope, horn, chalk, lime, straw, the dead book facing outward, and the habit that keeps Whiskers clever but hungry, turning fear into chores you can finish. The debt room pretends arithmetic is a sword. You put a cap on it. Horn on the lectern glows like a coin that refuses to brag, and your plank goes up at mouth height where laziness must bruise itself to leave. Bread in trough, not cloth, drains limed fortnightly, vinegar nightly, straw shaken daily, horn mandatory, cap, not breath, chalk dots at dawn and dusk, rope loop on chest, tug tested at dusk, window unbarred on Beatles Day, soup ledger read at porch. No sermons longer than soup. The Lord looks at the numbers he hired to frighten men and discovers they prefer soup. The steward, who has been practicing humility all winter, sets the stew mistress's ledger beside the Beatles' dots, so debt and dinner confess together. You make them read both aloud under horn until debts remember what drains already know. Flow is cheaper than stalemate. Before we roll the charter under the next arch where new wrists will have to touch it, do the two things that keep this whole channel stocked like a bucket line. Subscribe and tap the bell. We publish a new room daily, and in the comments leave your one lintel law you would actually hang at home, short enough to be obeyed by wrists, not negotiated by tongues. Bread in trough, lime fortnightly, cap, not breath, rope loop on chest, soup read, no sermons longer than soup. I'll pin the stubborn ones and raid them for the opening plank of our next series. Numbers lose their temper when sunlight learns to hear them. The steward reads arrears and you translate them into bowls. 2/4 of horn panes at the shrine paid by Dice House fines, 5 snuffer rings bought by a notch, tail tariff funded 3 cats and a terrier tether, lime slaked by parish, straw shaken by ward, bearers bread posted, widow stipends kept. The Lord asks his clerk how many caps the chapel needs for market drills. The clerk answers with the cap drill itself, cap, 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 and blushes when the sacristan applauds. The steward, obliged to become an adult, writes practice kept at the bottom of his own sheet, and you forgive him 2 years of usefulness he owes your alley. Storm looks for a song at the quay and finds a ledger. The river heaves against the arch. Horn panes blink along the quay master's office. Your crosses on powder doors darken to warn, while stars at horn doors glow like a grammar. You and the stew mistress stand in the square again. Not heroic, not pretty. She with ladle and column, you with horn and plank. She reads brush to bowls, bowls to horn, cats paid, terriers tied, drains limed, vinegar nightly, bearers bread, widow stipends, extra at cells chalked new. You point to no sermons longer than soup, and the wind agrees. The watchboat rows hooks as if rowing were a vow. The bell captain keeps time with lids. A factor from the quay signs permission for salt while his mouth learns to pronounce other people's dinners. The river pretends to be poetry and fails. Good. You owe one last walk to the wet artery under the silk hall, because drains are the only place epilogues should be written. Horn coin on slime shows you what you bought. tallow scraped, vinegar nightly, lime fortnightly, bread in trough, cloth away, rat boards pinned, cats paid, terriers tied, chalk dots on lids, cap drill in scullery. The drain breathes. Rats stare at your pinned boards like scholars who missed their class. You add one last star where horn saved silk, one last cross where powder sleeps and promises to mind its elders, and you chalk lime on a joint that thinks it can daydream. The tallower's boy hums the bucket beat while he slakes because his wrists have learned to be wiser than his tongue. You let the sound bless you. In the second passage, you audit success without piety. Bread arrives by trough, not romance. Names are called before dots are added. Rope loops lie where chests expect them. Caps sit at mouth height where children can order them to work. The gaoler reads the short psalm at dusk the way you told him to. He washes his hands where lantern boys can see. The terrier yawns in a way that means famine, not neglect. You chalk two fish where a debtor taught another to cap and drill. You chalk a circle where the gaoler left his window unbarred for the beetle. You chalk nothing where the room is already obeying better than you hoped. The rats watch from a crack and decide again to take their experiments to houses that haven't learned nouns. That is the only compliment you need. The stew mistress closes her season's book by reading it into wind and coin until boredom is a sacrament. Brush to bowls became horn panes, bowls inverted became cap rings and the lesson about breath, notches became cats and a terrier's tether, powder bowls became crosses and vinegar and a promise the quay could sign, lime became rats that moved and drains that rabbits would consider respectable. She reads bearer's bread, widow's stipends, extra 2 ladles where chalk arrived late. She reads practice kept and the alley claps once in the meter of lids. You say nothing, because talking now would be vanity. She nods to the Lord's board because it let her ledger share a table with debt. This is the only politics you can stand. You plant the charter under the arch the way a mason sets a cornerstone. 2 mint tacks, a ferrule tap, horn light teaching wood to be visible. Bread in trough. Drains limed, vinegar nightly, straw shaken, horn mandatory, cap not breath, chalk dots, rope loop, window unbarred, soup red, no sermons longer than soup. Surrounding planks pick up echoes, lime slaked, cat paid, terrier tat, boards pinned, powder crossed, horn proved. Until the arch hums. Lantern boys trace the symbols under your nose without asking. The beggar king stands beside the board and points for free, because pointing has become a job he likes. The alderman's nephew hammers 2 more tacks and then pretends to be bored. That is the right costume for pride here. There's a last rat to audit, and it lives in rumor, not in drain. You go back to the cell where a man had been forgotten and now has become furniture, straw, trough, cap, rope, chalk. You call his name for seats and compassion match. You count his breaths because chalk taught you to. You hand him bread by trough and make him break it loud enough for drains to hear disappointment. The rat in the crack watches and loses interest. You write 8 in your little book next to paid, capped, slaked, read, renewed, practiced. You close the book and put your palm on the plank one last time so it can steal your pulse into its grain. Because you promised viewers a finish that doesn't turn drill into myth, you walk the keep in one last loop with horn level and rope behaving like clothing. Chapel. Caps at mouth height, caps drilled, candles 2 hands from cloth, psalm short, no vigils after bell. Hall debt read beside soup, Lord present beside dots, plank legible, steward literate in mercy. Armory, bread in trough, rats board, cat smug, terrier tied, lime sling at slot. Kitchen, bread weighed, vinegar nightly, cloth away, horn mandatory, cap drill, rat boards pinned. Gatehouse, dead book facing outward, chalk dots at dawn and dusk, rope loop, tug tested at dusk, window unbarred on Beetle's day. Quay, stars where horn proved, crosses where powder sleeps, permission slips carried like bowls. Arch, charter at mouth height. Lane, stew read in weather, bell captain humming the bucket beat, dog lying where carts like to pause. None of it is brave, all of it is alive. What did you learn exactly, you who carried horn and chalk through drains and debts and doors? That rats weren't villains, forgetting was. That drains aren't enemies, unlimed drains are. That bread turns into traps if the trough lives in cloth. That law is a plank you can tap with a ferule. Culture is a drill done under weather. That the true miracle was not grace but receipts. That the only theology a keep can afford during a bad year is rope on chest, cap on lamp, lime in slot, bread in trough, soup ledger read, dots posted, no sermons longer than soup. That boring is a word neighborhoods learn to love when they've earned it. Now make this portable the way medieval streets always did. Hang a rule where tired hands will have to touch it. Subscribe and tap the bell so our next series opens with your plank already in it. Then nail your one-sentence lintel law in the comments, one you'll actually enforce at home. Bread in trough, lime fortnightly, cap not breath, rope loop tug tested, window unbarred, soup read, no sermons longer than soup. Also pitch the next theme title you want hammered into drills. We'll carry your nouns under another arch. How parish bells outran gossip. Why city walls ate generals. What market stalls taught ministers. We'll meet by a new plank, write short truths where laziness must bruise itself to leave, and practice the only medieval magic that still works, turning fear into furniture you can touch.